Hello everyone, GM. Welcome back to another episode of Overpriced JPEGs. It is our Friday weekly recap episode where we are going through the biggest stories of the day. Joining me for this exercise is the amazing Gavin Purcell. I am so excited. Gavin was on the show a couple of weeks ago. We got really good feedback. People really loved having him on. And he is also now on the Overpriced JPEGs team. He's here initially in a consulting capacity, really helping out on the podcast production side. He has a background in this. For those who don't know, he was a producer on The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon. He was a showrunner for Jimmy Fallon. He worked at Vox. I mean, he's just steeped in digital media throughout his whole career, and then is also a total degen. You may know him as FonkyDonk on Twitter or on Discord. So for the last 2 years, he's been deeply degenning. We talk about that a little bit at the beginning of the show. So that's Gavin. So excited to have him here with me today and on the team in general. A couple other housekeeping notes before we get into this. We launched a new franchise, I'm calling it, just a new recurring show, cadence to be determined, but with my friend John Rogers, who is a former Disney exec, and we are doing a recurring segment called Blockbuster on the show, where we really break down everything that's happening in Hollywood, in the industry broadly, and then how it intersects with blockchain and NFTs. The very first episode of that came out this past Wednesday, so you can go find that, listen to that. It's a really good one. We really break down John's theory around blockchain and storytelling, and there is nobody better than John to do that. Other housekeeping items, as you know, if you've been listening to the show, we have a Substack and y'all should go check it out. We've got amazing content coming out every week now and other fun things that are going to start coming out on that side. So we'll include the link below, but go subscribe to the Overpriced JPEG Substack if you have not already. And of course, along those same lines, if you are not subscribed to the YouTube or if you don't follow us on any of your podcast channels, please do that. It's such a help for the show to have your support and to have your subscription. So please, whether you watch the show or listen to the show, go make sure you follow and subscribe. I think those are all my main admin updates. More updates will be coming out about the Overpriced tour over the next couple of weeks, how you can reserve tickets for that. I have some other really exciting guests that I am excited to announce, but I can't announce just yet. We're still finalizing with some teams. So expect more of that, but no major update on that today. And so with that, I will say on this episode, we of course talk about things I hope you're expecting us to talk about. Our big story, we talk about the OpenSea Blur marketplace wars continuing, really breaking down that story, giving our thoughts on that. We also talk about the proof news, that proof of conference is canceled. That was disappointing, but I get it. So we'll get into that a bit. And we also play a game of Overpriced, Underpriced, and give our thoughts on some of the latest things like the golden SewerPass that has been listed for 2,222 ETH. Before we get into all of that, though, we do have to hear a word from our lovely sponsors. Click the links below to show your support for them and for our show. And thanks for listening. I am so excited to announce that this year, Overpriced JPEGs has partnered with OpenSea, the world's leading NFT marketplace, built for everyone, creators, collectors, noobs, and experts alike. I'm an OpenSea user because they have the best selection of NFTs and a truly inclusive view of the ecosystem, supporting 8 chains and 8 global languages. I trust the systems they've put in place to keep the space safe, like copyright protection, malicious URL detection and removal, robust verification, and more. It's why they are the place to buy, sell, and create NFTs. That's right. You know OpenSea, you use OpenSea, but did you know that OpenSea now has drops? New exclusive projects launch every week from top projects and creators, and you can check them out now using the link in the show notes. They also recently introduced self-serve drops, which is in beta, and allows creators to launch their projects right on OpenSea. This drops product gives creators access to tools like rich storytelling drop pages, multi-chain support, and drop mechanic customization. The full launch for self-serve drops is coming this spring. So check out the upcoming drops on OpenSea right now using the link in the show notes and own what moves you. You'll also be supporting the show in the process. Gavin, welcome back to Overpriced JPEGs and really to the Overpriced JPEGs team.
I know, this is so exciting. It's been one of those things where I've talked to you a very long time ago, and then I was on the show and I was like, God, how cool would it be to work with Carly? And now we're working together, which is super fun. And I said this before, but my favorite thing about this is I've done media for so long in some form or another, and now I get to put these 2 years of what I thought kind of was useless knowledge to work, because it's I got so much of this in my brain the last 2 years, and now it's a space that I'm super fascinated with, and now I get to kind of spend my days thinking about it, which is great.
It's so fun. And I've made this joke on meetings with you before, but it was funny because after you came on the show, I mentioned to you like off screen, right? So to speak, I was like, oh, I'm looking for a producer. I need them to know Web3 because I've talked to a bunch of producers who don't know Web3 and that's just a non-starter. But, I want somebody with some experience in this. And, if you know anyone, and then you emailed me and you were so sweet. You were like, oh, I don't know if you'd be interested, but like, I have some time. So I'd be happy to like help you out if, no hard feelings if you're not interested. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, obviously I'm interested. You're the perfect candidate. So anyway, so very excited about this. And
by the way, I should say before we jump in, like one of the coolest things about doing this is like leveling up the overall Overpriced brand, right? Like I think one thing that we were excited to do is like, take this, whole thing to kind of the next level and kind of like dive in and open the door to all sorts of other cool things that like my background opens up and that your background opens up and like really cool ways to kind of like try a lot more in this space. Because as you and I have talked about, like, being creators and being in a world where like you're trying to kind of drive forward with this, world of like the creator economy, part of that is like leveling up as you do stuff and expanding and trying all sorts of new things. So anyway, I'm excited about it. It should be fun.
I'm so excited. And I ditto, or I keep saying the word ditto and I mean something else. Co-sign everything you just said, whatever the word would be. I agree.
Fair.
I agree with the sentiment.
Co-sign is the new ditto. Yeah, exactly.
I co-sign that sentiment. All right, let's dive in. I mean, things are happening. It's so funny because I feel like in the what I would call like the deep bear, which I would not describe as being in now, like it still felt like there were so many things happening and I would still from time to time be like, gosh, it's so busy. And now it feels like a different level, or there's a just different level of like things to track. This is where I like to start. What are the vibes to you right now? Like, how are you feeling kind of macro, micro market sentiment?
Yeah, so it was interesting when you talked to Zeneca last week and kind of hearing his thoughts, because I think I kind of echo that in some ways. It still feels a little tiny bit unstable, but I will say, there was that 6-month period from like Luna until like really December of last year, which felt like, oh God, what is going on here? Like, are we really just going to walk away from this thing? And I will say the one thing I made sure of myself to do, because I've done this thing where I've walked away in those times before and missed really cool things, right? And so I think right now, the thing I keep coming back to is like, okay, there were people building during this time, or there were deals getting made, because like we're seeing some pretty interesting stuff. And I think the most interesting stuff is, and what's encouraging to me and why I feel like the vibes are pretty good right now, the small project stuff is really interesting. And obviously new NFT projects are cool, but I'm starting to see like and hear about bigger brands and bigger things happening. And those are the market movers, right? Like those are the things that can really shift the perception of what these are. And we talked about Reddit on the show. You've talked about Reddit a lot, but like that was kind of the beginning stages, but we're starting to see some larger brands get involved. And when that happens, I think you have a much larger playground to play in versus like this kind of world where everybody's kind of shifting the same pools of money back and forth to each other. So I feel good. I feel pretty good right now.
I totally agree. And, I think this activity surge, which is obviously Blur related, is very temporary. And we'll get into that. And I'll take kind of maybe a strong stance there. But let's do some quicker hits here. I think some of the things you're referring to, we have the Spotify news. We have some Amazon rumblings that I don't know. Yeah. I'm not even sure how public or real this is, but they're rumblings.
Yeah, we should. So I think there's 3 big things to kind of talk about here in this idea of like where the bigger stuff is happening. I think so. Talk about the Spotify thing, which is interesting to me because Spotify now. This is one of those things where like you see all these tweets and everything. Spotify looks like it's testing, and it is testing. It's been announced. Like they're testing Web3 integration to unlock content with NFTs, basically. So they have there's a screen where you can see a wallet connection within Spotify, and it's the kinship program, which is I think
the
Warner's.
Jimmy, it's the ape,
yes,
it's UMG, it's Universal Music
UMG,
Group.
yeah, sorry, it's UMG, not Warner. So like they have already started working on this thing, which is a pretty big deal, right? Because I think the one thing people have talked about for a long time is at some point music NFTs were going to unlock in some significant way, and there's been a lot of people playing around with music NFTs for a while. I think Sound.xyz is a big thing. It's been around for a bit. But the thing that would unlock it, as with almost all NFTs, is access to a much larger audience, right? And if there's any large audience in the music world at Spotify, I think business model wise, we'll see what happens, but that automatically makes these things much more valuable to me. And just the fact that like Spotify as a brand is exploring this now is pretty exciting.
Totally. And I think you were sort of starting to get at this, which is like, we don't really know exactly what's happening yet. If you're seeing me turn, it's because I'm like looking at this article and it's you know, it's not entirely clear to pick out what, when, time frames, you know, how serious, but token gated content is a no-brainer.
Yes.
Right? Like at some point, people are going to catch on to this, and the ability to collaborate with different groups, like it's just a no-brainer. And I feel like podcasts have been slow to adopt like subscription models, like Apple Podcasts. They felt so behind. Like there were so many podcasts that I listened to where it was like you could subscribe to get like the bonus episodes on Patreon.
Yeah, which feels like it's mid 2000s now, right? It feels
totally
so
bizarre. And now, but only recently did Apple really start allowing you to have like subscriptions in feed. And it just felt like, where are you guys? Like keep up. So, and you know, Spotify is just I think way ahead of Apple in terms of prioritizing investing in and trying to really maximize the audio experience. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Spotify do this first. But yeah, very exciting. And again, token gated content is I'm very bullish on. Oh, we have to mention as part of this, YouTube. I don't know if you and I didn't chat about this, but when we're talking about big companies, so YouTube just appointed a new CEO. Neil is his name?
Yeah, Neil. He was the chief product officer prior to this appointment. Neil
Mohan.
Yeah.
And apparently Google paid $100 million stock bonus to him to turn down a competing offer from Twitter. And
Good for him.
I know.
That's pretty nice. Good work.
Yeah, it doesn't suck. Must be nice. And it was, and he's like very big on NFTs. So I wouldn't be surprised if you started to see similar token gated testing coming out on YouTube.
Yeah, it's interesting. I did see some. So when this story came out, I did go and look at some of the larger YouTubers' take on this, because one of the most fascinating things about YouTube is whenever there's YouTube news, you get like 1,000 takes of YouTubers talking about it. The vast majority are hating on it still, right? So I think the vast majority of YouTubers are out there like, you know, talking about how this would be a bad thing, but the fact that he has actually said something out loud in the past that NFTs are interesting. Again, this goes back to that same conversation I think that Reddit kind of threaded the needle so nicely on. Part of what we're talking about here is a narrative shift, right? Because one of the hardest things about NFTs, when you hear the word NFTs, the vast majority of the world now, I would say like 90% thinks of NFTs as a scam, which is a bummer for us who care about them and think they're interesting. So maybe there's a world where like token gated content is a better way to look at this, right? Totally. Like you're not calling it NFTs, you're calling it token gated content. The one other thing I'll say about the Spotify thing before we move on is the opportunity, I think, for like a large artist to create like a fan-based NFT where super fans can own something, but then it unlocks something special in Spotify is so remarkably high. And I don't think anybody's really like, imagine, I don't know, Foo Fighters or some really large touring band, and what they could do if they were to kind of institute like almost like a VFriend style model that could open the door to like fan club stuff, but also open the door to you know, bootleg content or rehearsal content. Like I think fans would pay a lot of money for those things. And I'm not saying this is all about the money, but like those could become extremely valuable NFTs, especially if they had like exclusive audio that was connected to them. So I think music NFTs have been underrated for a while because they've been stuck in our kind of small little world, but the Spotify thing opens them up to a much larger audience.
Well, and the piece of music NFTs that has always been, I would maybe call it more interesting to me, is when you get into like the fan extension experience stuff. And NFTs as this multi-channel device and this way that you can move through the world, physical and then digital, is the holy grail to me. And Spotify integrating this, just those potentials explode, right? You think about going to the Foo Fighters concert, which I did, I don't know, 5 years ago, probably 10 years ago. I was in college. And then, and you know, getting a piece of merch that has an NFT that you can claim that unlocks something on the Spotify channel. Like it's that integratedness throughout your fan experience that I think is amazing. My last thing is, you say that the YouTubers are cynical on this. I just cannot imagine. And like the arrogance where I'm like, you don't think you're misunderstanding this? Like you think, were you paid $100 million in a stock bonus? Like you think Neil Mohan is the one who's the idiot who is missing the fact that this is a Ponzi scheme, but you like Brett on your couch, like is the one who's like Brett. Got it and like really understands the Ponzi scheme. Like what the fuck?
Well, and also the hard part is that it's an opportunity for them to have another source of income ultimately, right? Like the creator economy is all about trying to figure out multiple sources of income to come into yourself.
Well, yeah, and this is the thing is like there are so many smart people working in this space. And look, maybe we all end up being wrong, right? Let's just say it. But we're not wrong because it's literally only a Ponzi scheme and we're all complete morons playing a greater fool scheme. You know what I mean? Like, and I truly do not understand how anybody can like sit at home and like just think that all of these people are just that stupid and that it's just a Ponzi scheme and like we're all the like look at the people. Anyways, okay, that's my soapbox. I've given that before, but like I'm looking at this guy like Neil Mohan, who's like wildly, successful in business and life and all these things, and like thinking about all these little like 20-year-old creators being like, anyway, okay.
Cue the 20-year-old creators coming after us,
Oh, I'm sure. They're not watching. If they were, they would realize there's more to this.
Exactly.
They're not listening.
Exactly.
Okay, there's one other. Well, this Amazon thing I want to talk about.
Yeah.
The other thing that I think is exciting is Base, which is the new Coinbase thing. So we want to touch on that here at the top of the show. But Amazon is the other one, and there are rumors swirling here. Obviously, you had AWS partner with Ava Labs, which was sort of surprising to a lot of folks because that, Ava felt a little left fieldy there, but good for them. And, but what I know from the folks who I know at Amazon or who talk about this, like Amazon is so big that you can have different departments within that organization talking to different blockchains, not even know that the other departments, like an organization of that size, it is just sort of uncontrollable. So it's not like they have one unified strategy that straddles everything. So AWS is going and doing something with Ava Labs, and who knows what that means for Amazon Prime Marketplace subscribers who, who may have something totally different, which is the rumors we started to hear. I know from people that I know well who have like, there's definitely something. Amazon's doing something.
And by the way, so when them doing something, which is the same thing as Spotify, it's like them doing something is 1,000 times bigger than like, a small company in Web3 doing something, right? Because even if it's something, they're putting some version of money towards it. The opportunity to onboard the insanely large audience is a crazy level up if anything happens, which I think is pretty interesting.
Yeah, totally. And also because Amazon feels more in the vein of, for example, Spotify, YouTube, Reddit, Nike, where unlike some of these IP companies, when you think Warner Brothers or these companies with IP that they've basically just like licensed for NFTs, that's where I think it can feel very cash grabby. But when you look at like Salesforce, like these companies where they're just they're literally integrating it through minting, through whatever, Instagram. I mean, Amazon, I guess, could do a very cash grabby, low energy NFT.
It would be amazing,
thing,
right?
Where they try and like sell Amazon NFTs.
Amazon Azerbala.
Exactly. But like, obviously, that's not what they're going to do. So this is much more of like an e-commerce integration, which is just inherently so much more interesting. So, okay, let's talk Base. This came out this morning. We're recording this Thursday, February 23rd. It'll come out tomorrow, Friday. And we just got this news this morning. Coinbase has sort of been teasing something. And then it got announced that they are building a Layer-2 called Base that is essentially a fork of, it's using the Optimism open source like protocol tooling to build their own Layer-2. So it'll be much like Optimism from an architecture perspective, but it's their own chain. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think, okay, so the most interesting thing to me about this, and we all know we've been through the Coinbase kind of like NFT experience, which was like very disappointing for almost everybody in the NFT world. What's interesting to me about this, and I think is interesting about L2s in general, is that L2s built on Ethereum are using the network that exists that we all know and love, but kind of like doing things that are going to make it a little bit better in certain ways. And what I love about this is like in the first like tweet of their tweet storm that the Coinbase put out, like the goal of this is to onboard the next billion users, which of course is everybody's goal in this space and everywhere. But like, I think L2s were always going to be a version of that. And I don't think anybody's really nailed it yet. There's so many things you can do in an L2 that's interesting outside of having to start your own separate chain. And I think that seeing this kind of, if the system works right, and again, people use the dumb word flywheel all the time, but if the system works right, this is a rising tide that lifts all boats. And I would love to see like the sorts of things that are going to get developed on this. Because look, if you can have like if gas can be way less of a problem, that's a huge deal. If like security can be a really good thing on this L2, like if there's all these ways to kind of make the mainstream feel good about using this, great. I think the kind of, it's now kind of like put up or shut up time. Like you put something like this out, it's all about the builders that are going to build on it. So we'll see what comes out of it. But I'm excited. I mean, again, like whenever somebody comes out and says like, our goal is to get this wide, that's a really interesting goal to the people in the space that want to see this technology spread. I'm always interested in like the most techie stuff too, because it's like that's what's going to push it forward. But like this almost feels like there's the bistro restaurant, which is doing like the most like interesting gastronomical stuff, and this is like, okay, how do we build like the Chipotle for the blockchain? Like, how do we get this thing that's going to be good, that everybody likes, but also is going to get everybody going across the world? So that's what's exciting about it to me.
Yeah, and my takeaway, my high level takeaway is like this is they're trying to build their own DApp layer. They want to build DApps. Yeah. And to put it roughly, and this is coming from a Blockworks both thread and then episode that they put out. So shout out to Yano over at Blockworks who did this, but they had these different ideas like an identity layer and even like an ad, like how could Coinbase leverage its platform to almost like advertise all the cool people building things. I don't fully understand what they were picturing there, but they had these different concepts, again, the identity piece, and they would get like part of the way through them and it would sort of be working, but it wasn't fully there for them yet. And this layer, this building base is sort of like what they've decided foundationally they need to do to then build all of these consumer applications that they're really excited about. And that, I'm not technical enough to understand so much of this, right? But like the integration with their wallets, like they are pushing for just what is the most seamless, best user experience, where this can be really, really easy for you as a consumer. You have your Coinbase wallet that you trust because we're a public company and it's custodial, but like for God love, we are not FTX, whatever, right? And then you have these ways, and they keep saying like on-chain is new online, and that's where they want this to feel like.
Which, by the way, please, that would be amazing, right? If we can get people to understand that could be the next online, like that is like a massive level up. And I think from a narrative perspective, there's a way that makes crypto much more interesting for many, many more people again, right? Because I think in crypto, the first kind of push of crypto in the last couple of years, everybody was excited about it, but no one had really like seen it be integrated into things that were useful. The biggest, criticism about NFTs and crypto was always like, it's interesting, but what are you using it for? So this to me is maybe they can find a way to use it for stuff. Like that's the most important thing.
I want to flag a couple of things from Yano's blog post, Jason Yanowitz's blog post. He was saying, this is a Twitter thread, I should say. He interviewed part of the team at Coinbase who's working on this and then wrote a thread of takeaways. The interview itself is very interesting. There's no token, right? ETH, I mean, Coinbase said this too in their thing, like ETH is the gas, currency or whatever you want to call it. There's no MEV. So I think from a regulatory perspective, that's something they're focused on. There was another thing that I found really interesting. Just this idea that this is what Jason kind of flagged, like we're in this interesting world in crypto where, they're building a competitor to Optimism in many ways, using Optimism's infrastructure.
Technology.
And they're also...
and
that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally. Yeah. And also they're building a layer upon which competitors to a bunch of Coinbase products are going to be built.
Right.
And this is this very interesting kind of new competitive landscape we're in where that's what happens. I don't know. Maybe this has always been like, maybe there's plenty of comps to this in business historically, but I don't know. It strikes me as very interesting. And it's because we all realize like we're in such an early stage of this that we just need like the boats to like, like for a chance for any of us to succeed, we have to open up the possibility that other people succeed over us.
Yes.
And that's fine.
Yeah.
We just like, we need this to work, we're all in this together. All right, moving on to our main story today. The marketplace wars continue. Blur versus OpenSea. And new shots across the bow since I recorded last week. So Zeneca and I recorded an episode, based on the information we had at the time. I think the day after we recorded that episode, there were a whole slew of new updates. The first being, of course, OpenSea's big moves. So OpenSea temporarily dropped all marketplace fees. So they're 2.5% that they would usually take on transactions. They dropped that to 0, and creator fees were dropped to basically 0.5% guaranteed with them being optional. So you can choose to pay more creator fees. I had predicted on the show last week, or I'd said what OpenSea should do is set like a 0.5% minimum creator fee, even if folks don't block various marketplaces, which is, not entirely what they did, but sort of what they did. So that was fun to get some credit there. But they took it so much further than I was really expecting them to. And the other big piece of news, we'll maybe take these one at a time, is then, of course, this loyalty score component that Blur has now introduced, which is if you list on Blur and you don't list on any other marketplaces, which of course really just means OpenSea, because I don't think they care all that much if you're even listing on LooksRare or whatever else, you get extra rewards. You can accrue this loyalty score that'll give you extra points for the airdrop that is forthcoming at some point. Yeah. And they even have a button where you can go like 150% or 100% loyalty or whatever. You click this button and it will automatically delist you from other marketplaces. And they're using Seaport infrastructure, OpenSea's Seaport infrastructure to make that happen. So let's take it one at a time. I mean, what do you think of OpenSea's move? And then what do you think of this latest Blur move?
Okay, so first of all, I think the most important thing we talk about is like, this is like a bare knuckle brawl of two businesses that we haven't seen really in this space in this sort of way yet, I feel like. This reminds me of like, Microsoft versus Apple in a weird way, or really even more like Microsoft versus Mark Andreessen's original company, Netscape, right? When they had these kind of browser battle wars. And what it feels like when you're a participant in the space is like, that's interesting. That's like, there's a lot of just like, and because everyone in the space is so invested in it, everybody has an opinion. And it's like, we're getting to like opinion overload. But I will say, I kind of believe innovation always drives interesting things, right? And I think that there's an interesting thing that's happening here, which is that Blur is the startup kind of like, little kid in the space is really pushing, and OpenSea is trying to figure out how to respond, right? Because in a lot of ways, OpenSea had a giant monopoly on this space for a long time, and they didn't have to fend anybody off. And so that's where we are right now. I think you and I can get deeper on whether this is sustainable. I think you both agree it probably isn't sustainable as a thing, but I think the innovation aspect of this is really fascinating. And I think OpenSea's a little bit back on their heels right now, trying to figure out what to do.
I think dropping to 0 marketplace fees was smart, because that was, if only in a PR sense, though it's not, of course, I don't think they did this as a PR move. I think they did this because they're trying to get market share back, right? But it was such a weapon that it was such a talking point that was weaponized against them over and over again. Now, of course, and to some extent, I guess in this tribalism, like I'm partial to OpenSea and they're a sponsor on the podcast, though I've been partial to them predating that, right? In some way, like Blur is going to have to put a marketplace fee in place, right? Like they're completely unmonetized. These companies are now literally just burning money, and none of them are making money. So, there was, I guess, affection for Blur or for these other marketplaces that had these lower fees, but like, it's just less money for them to do things, and Blur is going to have a fee someday. So, but I think it was smart for OpenSea to do that temporarily. And of course, it's indefinite for right now. We don't know when they'll add the fee back. I imagine they might not even know when they're going to add the fee back in. But it helps to levels the playing field for them against Blur. The creator thing is a bummer. I'm less like positive on that. The other thing that's interesting to me here is the number of traders on OpenSea is still higher, but the volume on Blur is higher. And I have thoughts about what that means. But I don't know if you want to respond just there to OpenSea or the loyalty score thing.
I think so. The loyalty score thing, I think, just feels like, business tactics, right? Like,
just like wildly transparent.
And by the way, like,
you're going
again,
there.
Going back to like, I heard an interview with Pac-Man, the guy who he was recently doxxed, the founder of Blur, young kid, very smart. I think people forget, and this goes to the project about kind of creators, right? It's like people forget big business is cutthroat in a lot of ways. And I think what they were saying is like, okay, well, we're going to go after this thing and we're going to make this, like, we're going to try as hard as we can to take market share. I think the interesting question here becomes, and I think you've hinted at this before, is this a temporary boost or is it not, right? Because I think that from the creators, let's step back real quick. The creator perspective to me is still hard, right? Because there's two different things that are happening in this space. And one thing is the financialization of NFTs and what it means to treat NFTs as like a purely financial product, right? Because I think that's what's happening really with Blur. It's focused on pro traders. It's focused on making trading like the number one feature of it. You don't even really see the NFTs very well. Like it's kind of smaller. You can, but you have to like expand it out. So that's a really big business for some people. The other side of this is I think people got into this business, especially creators got into this because it was a really interesting mix of art and finance and like with these kind of weird worlds blending together. And so when the art side becomes way less important and the finance side becomes way more important, I think, of course, artists and creators are going to be pissed off. Right now, in some ways, artists, I always want to separate artists from like large projects because large projects in a lot of ways are financial institutions. Like you can talk about Azuki and how beautiful the art is and if you really like what they do, but ultimately you have 10,000 PFPs that have been often traded as almost financial assets for a while. That's very different than Amber Vittoria's work or like Dmitry Cherniak's work, which is like a true art piece that you would see somebody want to buy and hold, right? So this is kind of gets at the weird world of where we're at right now in this kind of growth stage. And I think the one thing I'll say about what Blur's doing is it's at least bringing the financial aspects of this to light. Like, I think there's a lot of people that have been in this space for the financial aspects, and it's really focusing a little bit more on that. And we see, oh, there was a lot of movement on that side, and these are the people that are doing it. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's putting the financialization piece of this front and center is what you're saying, because we're seeing they're drawing in the folks that are chiefly and primarily interested in that to some extent, and then the people who want to capitalize on those people, like the OSF Mando move, which we're going to talk about, which is the dumping the 72 apes because there's liquidity, and I think that was smart on their part. I mean, look, it seems like at a base level, what's clearly happening here is OpenSea had this huge head start and this huge benefit, which was it entrenched consumer behavior. People were used to OpenSea, and so they used OpenSea. And you've had marketplaces like LooksRare, from LooksRare to X2Y2 to whatever, like try to do these like almost vampiric attacks, right? And say we'll pull you away with a token, or like we'll directly target OpenSea's users. One of them did an airdrop for OpenSea users, if you remember. I forget which one it was. Which was very like Uniswap, SushiSwap. So like all these marketplaces have stepped in and tried to incentivize folks to come over to their marketplace, and it just wasn't enough. Partly because their marketplaces weren't differentiated or good enough to really draw folks away. The reward system didn't go far enough, didn't last long enough. Whatever the case was, they couldn't do it. Blur is making the biggest, best, most successful attempt of this at anyone. And so this incentivization stuff cannot last forever, right? What we're seeing, and this is where you can almost separate the marketplace wars from also just what it's doing to the NFT market. This period in the NFT market absolutely will not last, right? We'll get into this when we talk about OSF and Mando. What they did, selling 72 apes, I think very smart, right? If you have a portfolio of things right now, like take advantage of basically unprecedented liquidity in the space, not just because people are trying to farm by trading, but because the way Blur works sets up liquidity, right?
Yes.
So and then the long tail question of this, though, is because this is going on for so long, because the platform itself is good, Blur's platform is good, and it does have features that an OpenSea doesn't have. Because they're doing things like you literally can't list anywhere else, and incorporating those features, like, are they able to sustain a full shift in that entrenched consumer behavior? And I think the answer very well may be yes. I mean, what it seems like we're clearly seeing is, and this goes back to, you actually have more traders still on OpenSea. This is like 500 traders on Blur who are like, most of this activity, most of this stuff that we're talking about is like 500 people, which is tiny in the big scheme of things. And one place this could settle is OpenSea as sort of the, I don't want to say newbie, but the creator,
the retail,
much more retail marketplace for folks like that. And Blur is your your high intensity Wall Street, high frequency trader types, who enjoy the super like market betting feel to it, who are doing big volume. And if this space grows appropriately, there should be room
for both. Yeah, I think that's true. I think that I will say, I wish that OpenSea had not, it feels to me like they are kind of chasing Blur now. And what I would have rather seen them do a little bit from a strategy standpoint is to decide that's the audience they wanted to go after, right? Was the creator retail audience. And my worry is a little bit is that, and we've talked about this, where the space isn't, with the 500 traders being the majority of the trading on Blur right now, the space is not nearly as big as a lot of people think it is, right? It's still a pretty small space. So the question becomes is like, until there's this mass onboarding of new people that we've talked about for years, but we talked about at the beginning of the show, is it just going to be the shifting of where this money is being spent in the space right now? And is OpenSea right to try to like kind of double up on what Blur is doing, because that's where the majority of the volume is going to be for a while? I don't know, but I personally wish that they had kind of taken a tact where like they say we're going to differentiate ourselves from Blur from the beginning, and we have, and this is who we are, right? But I think ultimately, the interesting thing about all this is going to be like, we can dive into like whether or not Blur is sustainable, because I think that's a big question mark right now. I think just to speak to the deal that you talked about, was OSF and Mando selling 77 apes for.
Was it 77? I thought it was 72. Not that.
Oh, sorry. OSF and Mando selling 72 apes for $9.1 million in one large transaction, right? Like they basically got it. Machi Big Brother, I think, is the one who bought most of them. And this is all due to Blur's bidding system, right? And Blur's bidding system was created as a new way to kind of ensure liquidity into the NFT market.
Well, the punchline is they sold $9.1 million of apes, 72 apes, and the floor price didn't move.
Yes,
and that's
exactly.
because of because of the liquidity of the Blur bidding system.
Yes.
It didn't even affect the floor price.
Which if it it'd just be OpenSea, or this bidding system hadn't existed, the floor price would have probably dropped by 50% or more, right? Because there's that few things on, and they probably wouldn't even have been able to sell that many, right? Because there wouldn't have been that much of a desire for them at the point. I think what's interesting about this is bringing liquidity like that into the market might in some ways really inspire other market makers to kind of see NFTs as a thing where they could conceivably have larger buckets of liquidity and have these assets, because again, we're talking about these as financial assets now more than we're talking about them as art, have these assets become something that could be much more tradable and much more stable, right? Like that's one thing that we've seen a little bit with this Blur bidding system, is that yes, floors are going up and down, but weirdly, like there's a stability level to them right now. Floors are slightly down and then they go slightly up, and they're getting manipulated, which is always a tricky thing. But like there is a stability when that much liquidity exists. And I think the bigger question is this liquidity there just right now for farming the next airdrop? And it might.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I just have no idea why. I don't know why Maki Big Brother puts up 10 million of liquidity in a scenario
unless he's getting
rewarded, where he's not getting rewarded. Yeah, I just don't know how that happens. And for anybody, I think probably most people know how this works at this point. But just the real quick hit with this is like you can just put up bids where it's not like you're bidding on a specific ape. You're just putting up a bid for basically apes, the collection.
Yep.
And you get rewarded that way. Like that, you'll be a part of that airdrop. You get these Blur rewards as a result of that. And then I can come along and just accept bids. Like I can just go and list my apes, and there's already a sitting pool of liquidity there, which is very interesting. And I don't know what the right levels, what like a natural level of this is, but like we are in a completely clearly manipulated market. I mean, I was joking with you earlier, like it's like being in a zero interest rate environment, right? Like things are just manipulated, and you're sort of not in reality, because that can't last forever. Now that lasted for whatever it was, 12 years.
4 years, yeah, exactly.
4 years maybe, but it was on and off. And I don't see how this becomes a new normal at all. I think we are completely seeing an environment in a super highly charged, highly manipulated environment as a result of one actor. And I think it's cool. Like I maybe sound cynical when I say that. I actually don't. I think it's fascinating what Blur is doing. I actually really like the bidding system, the liquidity pools. I think that's fascinating, but I don't think anybody should kind of delude themselves into thinking that anything about this is a new normal.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I so applaud the OSF Mando thing. Was like, clearly, I think it was very smart on their part, because 70 apes are liquid, 72 apes are not liquid. Yeah. Right? Like they were saying, they basically were like, we have illiquid assets, because at that scale, they are illiquid. And this is a very unique moment right now in this industry where you can get liquidity on assets like that in a way that you just previously couldn't, without also like ruining the community, like making everyone mad at you because you've tanked the floor price.
Which is really interesting to me. And I think this goes to talk about something larger about this space, that there used to be a real sell shaming was like a real thing, right? Like that if you were selling something, and what I think is so interesting about this right now is I saw very little sell shaming on that. Obviously, Mando and OSF are people love them in the space and they've done a lot for the space, but it's because it didn't drop the floor. And it's always about what are my bags doing and how do I get my bags? And no one feels like they got to sell shame if the floor hasn't dropped 10%, because to them, my thing's still worth what I thought it was. Congrats, bro. You got your sale. Congrats. But like if they had sold it and it dropped the floor by 50%, I think we'd be seeing a very different thing. I do want to say one last thing about this liquidity pool thing, which I think you're 100% right. It does feel like it's not going to last. I think the interesting thing about Blur is going to be, and I think one of the interesting things always about innovative teams, no matter where they come from, to kind of disruption stuff. This is a big disruptive move, obviously, in this space. Blur's been working for a year, and they worked for a while before they launched. I assume there's probably other things that are going to come from them that they're smart enough to know that and promise of an airdrop can't continue. So
yes,
they seem smart. I would imagine there's some sort of other financial system tools like that people used in DeFi that might be finding their way into the NFT market that they will unveil. But I think you're right. Right now, this is like an unprecedented thing that will not last. It doesn't feel like this can last for that long because there's just not enough liquidity in the space.
Totally. And it may last for another 6 months, right? Like, I don't know how long this airdrop farm, I don't know how long this, we don't know when they're going to do airdrop 2 or whatever, or 3 or whatever we're on.
Yeah.
Are we on 2 or 3?
We're on
2.
I think we're on 2.
Right?
We're on 2. Yeah. And they did say, by the way,
it's existed for so long.
The one thing they've said is that double rewards last until April 1st. They have not said when they're going to drop the next airdrop.
That's my birthday.
Hey,
happy birthday to me.
Sell your bags before April 1st. That's your birthday
exactly.
note. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. The last thing that I think is important here, and it's actually getting to a little bit, I think it's related to the point you're making, which is that this is a savvy team who no doubt understands this dynamic, right? Mm-hmm. And probably has other tricks up their sleeve, is you just have this very interesting just business model case study when you have OpenSea and you have Blur. And obviously there's been some talk around an OpenSea token and people suspecting that's coming with OpenSea as part of their thread when they dropped their marketplace fees to 0 and their creator royalties to 0.5. They sort of said, we're looking for other ways, we're like exploring other ways to reward our loyal community or whatever, right? And so people are like, oh, there's going to be a token. I am so skeptical or dubious that OpenSea will have a token for so many reasons. And one, they've been, I think, pretty clear in the past that they, well, I should say no, they've like alluded to wanting to go public before, and they got a lot of public, they drew a lot of ire for that. But I think it's pretty clear that OpenSea has wanted to go more the Coinbase route and to become a public company. And it's not a token. It's almost like a Web2 company that plays in Web3 rather than like a Web3 business model company, which, by the way, I don't have really a problem with personally. No. And then you have Blur, which is I don't have a problem with either, which I think is a fascinating, feels like a very new experiment. And I'm not old enough to maybe know that there again are comps in business history like this, but which is, and I think we talked about this a little bit last week on the show, but like the VCs aren't looking for the exit in the form of going public or getting acquired. They want their exit liquidity is the token, right? Mm-hmm. Their token unlock is actually the return they get. And maybe on top of maybe there is an acquisition at some point. Like I don't know, but we're sort of in this new world because like the token becomes governance, and that is just fascinating. Like seeing how those two models play out and which among those models win, I think is really interesting. And I say that's connected to your piece about more things up their sleeve. From what we know so far, it appears like this token will be a governance token. the governance holders, the holders of this token, will have a say in when these marketplace fees get turned on.
Yeah. Which
And
they
then
probably will, by the way. I mean, assuming that some
marketplace fees have to be turned on.
They have to, right? Or else it's not. And if they want the token to increase in value because it's that sort of thing, you would imagine there has to be an ongoing business that makes sense, right?
Totally. And the token holders, my understanding is, will get some percentage of marketplace fees, right? They'll get this this kind of like ownership stake, which again, we get into then, I don't know, will that be challenged from a securities perspective? Yeah. That will be the way to continue incentivize people who have used the marketplace. But like it doesn't incentivize the continued like 10 million liquidity once the token has been essentially fully distributed. Unless they decide that that's the marketplace fees, like, you know, a percent go to token holders and a percent go to the liquidity providers. Like, I don't know. Maybe they do something like that. Anyway, I just wanted to flag. I think that's really interesting to even just look at how these two businesses. Blur has a lot more flexibility in what they can do by having this token. OpenSea is a lot more hamstrung by being more traditional. But Blur's taking a much bigger risk by doing that too, because who knows where, you know, we're gonna kind of come down regulatory. Is going to come down on all of this.
Well, and also, yeah, exactly. That's a really good point. I also think the tricky thing is always when you're an established player, and OpenSea very much is being, you know, they raised at a $13 billion valuation.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
You're just opportunity to, and by the way, clearly if they raise again, they're going to have to do a down round because I think they raised in the heart of the bull market. But I think the opportunity as a smaller team, because I'm sure Blur, you know, I don't know how many people work at OpenSea, but Blur's got to be a tiny compared to the amount of people there, is that like your ability to kind of like zig and zag is much faster and easier. So even though Blur, you know, maybe this thing works, maybe it doesn't long-term, this bidding system, they've already put a flag down and said, like, we're serious, right? Like, we are a serious competitor, and OpenSea has opened the door and said, like, we have to take these people serious. And so now we're really getting that old-fashioned, like, you know, drop-down, bare-knuckle battle. And again, going back to what we said at the very beginning, innovation's good. I think innovation is good for any space, and there are always casualties, which which sucks. You know, it really sucks. Yeah, okay. Which fucking sucks. It fucking sucks. Yeah. Like it sucked in the mid 2000s in Web 2. Like friends of mine were building incredible, you know, WordPress platforms, or they're building stuff where they were making a good living. And then Twitter and Facebook came along and like yoinked it all out, right? Because Twitter and Facebook took all. That's what often happens in these innovation cycles, and it's a bummer for some people, but it is the progress and part of how these businesses work.
I'm pro-competition. That's the reality. I am pro-competition and a legitimate competitor to anybody who has been able to act somewhat monopolistic on a market is a good thing. Yeah. And so it you know, hopefully it makes everybody better and serves the consumer. I mean, you know, we're all benefiting, I guess, from this, right? We're not paying marketplace fees now across the board. Like,
well, exactly.
You know, that's good for our bags.
I would say, and the only thing is like the royalty situation is going to be something that, I mean, there's been 1,000 things said about the royalty situation, but like, I feel for artists. I feel for people that are smaller people because like they are caught in the crosshairs for sure.
Do y'all realize what's happening over at Ledger? That the #1 leader in digital asset security has teamed up with Tony Fadell, builder of the iPod, to revolutionize the experience of owning digital assets securely. They're doing this with Ledger STAX. This is the most premium product to date, and it's so user-friendly. Ledger STAX is a palm-sized device with a new e-Ink 2 display on the cover and around the spine, meaning you can view and confirm transactions at a glance. You can also customize your ledger by displaying your favorite NFT on the cover, even when the device is off. Pair your new Ledger STAX with your Ledger Live to manage, earn, and hodl all your NFTs and over 500 coins. This space needs sleek user experiences, our iPod moment, and that's what Ledger has set out to do here without compromising their core promise of security. Keep your digital assets in the safest place they can be, a Ledger STAX wallet. Trust yourself with Ledger STAX and go to shop.ledger.com to pre-order your Ledger STAX now. They're shipping in April. And if you use the link in our show notes to pre-order now, you'll be helping the show as well. Thank you. Okay. Whew. Let's take a little in and out, and we'll move on to our next story. This was a sad one. Proof has canceled Proof of Conference. Mm-hmm. And it comes on the back of, I think, a slew of disappointments as far as the community is concerned by proof. Do you want to set this one up for us, Gavin? You're a Moonbird holder. You know, we've been talking about this.
Yeah. Actually, I'll give you a little bit of my basic background. So just to be clear, like I've actually known Kevin for a long time. We worked together like about, God, it's 15 years ago, maybe, when we were both at a company called G4. I like Kevin a lot. He's super smart, very creative.
He sent me a very funny video of like Jimmy Fallon and Kevin hanging out, like and a bunch of, I don't know.
Yeah, way back when Kevin and another guy named Alex Albrecht had a show called Dig Nation, which was based on dig.com. And it became one of the first big podcasts, and they did video podcasts. And I remember when I was working with Jimmy to launch Late Night with Jimmy Fallon, we did like a tour of some of the big web people at the time. And Alex and Kevin were like one of the big shows. So I remember I'm there shooting at this video, like I'm shooting a vlog of them recording. And I was actually texting with Jimmy last night about it. And he was like, oh my God, I was so nervous. Jimmy was nervous himself meeting those guys because like it felt like this totally different world at the time, right? You had like mainstream people and then you had like internet people, and it was Jimmy's kind of first crossover. Anyway, I like Kevin a lot. He's a good guy. So my backstory on this is Kevin actually and I talked in like October of 2021 when he was just starting Proof. In fact, I was even in the pre-Proof token gated Discord with a bunch of artists and kind of was there chatting with people, which was really fun. I got sucked into a totally different like kind of community in different places. So I ended up not minting Proof. My mistake, big problem. And then saw Proof go crazy. Obviously, Proof had a massive success at the end of that December, and then ended up buying into Moonbirds on the day of launch because I didn't win the raffle, but I bought two of them because I was like, I'm not going to miss Kevin's thing because I really trust Kevin and think it's interesting. So, you know, one of the things as a Moonbirds holder that's been interesting along the way is, first of all, I think Kevin did a really good job of like immediately understanding that like, okay, I'm building a company here, right? I'm not trying to just do a small project. I'm building a company and I'm trying to do a lot of things. I think the Proof conference stuff, so just to give the simple facts on it, like kind of what happened, it sounds like they were going to do this very cool conference, which I think all of us were kind of excited about in the space, especially as a holder, because like, I think anytime we can have these kind of events that make people feel like they're part of a community here and there's something interesting happen, it's really cool. I will say as a holder, one of my first thoughts when I saw the conference stuff happen was I was a little disappointed that the tickets were still being sold to Moonbirds for 0.75 ETH. Now, I understand this is all a business, and I understand, you know, this idea, but there were 5,000 tickets, and I thought as somebody who had held Moonbirds through a lot of stuff, because like, you know, this is not Kevin's fault because like the Moonbird value shot up like crazy. It was at a time where ETH was worth a lot much more. A lot of people have lost money on that project for no fault of his. They bought in too high, including myself, by the way, bought in too high, and now it's come down. My feeling is that the Proof conference was a little bit of like another one of these things with the Moonbirds situation where it felt like, oh shit, I don't know if these guys are getting what it feels like to be a holder or getting what it feels like to kind of want to be part of this community, but then not having it. And I think my biggest concern personally has been about communication, right? And I think I've said this to you before, and I've said this to other people. I believe as somebody who's come from like working in mainstream media, comms are like so important. Like the way that you do comms and the way that you talk to people and the way you talk to your audience. And in this space, it's even crazier because you're talking to a group of probably like, you know, 5,000 to 10,000 people, let's say, who own your thing. But those people own your thing and they think they are part of your company, right? They think that they're really part of who you are, even if it's not valued as such, or even if you may not see them as like part of your company, they all do. So I think that's the other big thing that this gets to a little bit is like this idea of what does it feel like to build in public? It's so hard to kind of get to the heart of this, but the truth of the matter is Kevin and this group have been building in public this company, but he's used to not building in public. He's used to building these companies without having to kind of like show his work. And so I think that's what has been happening over the last like, you know, 6 months is that the work hasn't been shown as strongly. And I think that's why people are starting to feel a little weird about the relationship. And I think why the Proof conference cancellation hit so hard, because I think it felt like, okay, no real work has been shown over this last 6 months, or, you know, we know mythics are coming, we know these other things are coming, but like, it felt like, what's happening now? Like it felt like that. And it just wasn't communicated in a way. So as a holder, I still think that Kevin is a good person. I know that for a fact, but also B, I think is a good builder and a good person to build in this space. Do I think that there's lots of lessons that need to be learned from this? Yes. I think that like he sounds like I listened to a Spaces he came on to after this announcement went down, and he seems like he is aware that there are a lot of lessons he has to learn. I think he also admitted that the CCO thing and the way it was rolled out was probably a mistake, at least the way that he mentioned it to everybody without not listening to the community. So I think it's one of those, again, it goes back to like, what's hard for me as a holder is like, God, another thing that feels like a bummer. But this is like not just a Kevin problem or not just a Moonbird's problem. I think it's a system-wide problem right now. And I think Doodles is going through the same sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm with you. I do think charging holders as much as they were charging Moonbird holders felt probably like not right. We should say this conference seems to have been canceled as a result of probably substandard ticket sales and then substandard
sponsors,
brand sales, right? Like, sponsor spots. And so when we talk about what has fed into this, I think there's a system-wide problem, and it's a system-wide problem that even goes beyond just NFTs, which is money. We're spending less money, and even more people are still spending. Brands are spending less money. There's this very weird thing happening in the economy right now where there's all these, I think nobody really quite knows what's happening. We thought there was going to be this massive recession. It kind of hasn't happened. So now we're thinking, is there going to be a softer landing recession? Like, what? And brands seem to be getting the message, and they're doing the layoffs, and maybe some of them should have done them sooner or what, like, and they're not, and they're cutting discretionary spending. But consumers like aren't totally doing it. That's a kind of funny, just more commentary on, I feel like, the economy at large right now. But you're definitely seeing that in a bunch of these conferences. I'm talking to a lot of people. I'm doing my own tour. I'm sponsored. I'm ad supported, right? Like, it is a hard time to be getting sponsor dollars. So, I think this is definitely a reflection of that in part. The biggest thing that I think this is a reflection of is proof still figuring out what it is.
Yes.
And that's totally okay, but it's very uncomfortable when you're, as you point out, building a public and have a holder base. To me, even the fact that they charged Moonbird holders is a reflection of proof trying to figure out what exactly it is. Because, I don't know exactly what their treasury management looks like, but I assume they're fairly savvy. And so they made, $80 million across primary and secondary sales last year, I'm pretty sure. Something on the order of that on all of their assets. They raised another 50 million or whatever it was, right? So you're talking about a company with probably north of $100 million in the bank, which is just insane. Even a really expensive conference they could afford to do.
Yep.
But if you're chasing down a couple different product routes, which is clearly what they've done, and you're getting to a point with all of them where you're saying, you know what, this isn't quite the right thing. We need to find another thing. That puts you on the defensive, where you're like, I don't want to spend $10 million of our treasury on this sick conference, even if I can't get the sponsors, even if I can't charge people, because I don't know how much runway I need. Like, you can't plan a runway if you don't know what you are. And I think that is, and I'm a huge Gavin fan as well. I'm a huge Proof fan, and I love that team. I've spent a good amount of time with that team. I think they're just like some of the loveliest people, truly. I think they're really a lovely team. So, but I think that's what I read from all of this. And we'll see. It sounds like March 2nd, early March, he's coming out with more announcements. But normal businesses are allowed to do this, and they're allowed to pivot, and all you have to do is kind of talk to the VCs who are like, yeah, sure, fine, got it. Like, I've got 10 other businesses and 30 other businesses I'm focused on anyway. So sure, like, come back to me when you're either, about to go broke, I guess, or you're about to take off. I don't know. I'm not a VC. I don't know actually how it works. But you know my point. Like,
I love
it's
that.
different
That
than
would be the
having
conversation.
That's what the VCs are like, yeah. But it is very different than having 10,000 people in a Discord who are kind of yelling at you. And so so I have a lot of sympathy across this. I think I totally understand people's frustrations, and I really do think a lot of this comes down to in some ways a lot of companies in the space are still trying to figure out what the model is and what they are.
You're so right. I mean, I think the biggest thing, and Kevin even said this on that space, I think he talked about like all the different pathways they went down and killed, right? And I think that when you hear that, you're like, yeah, that's smart. That's how businesses work, right? You do prototypes, and if it doesn't work, you move on. the hardest thing about this space is that part of your job as a founder, I think, is constantly communicating that. And this is, by the way, I don't even think you necessarily need to have like the products coming out all along the way. But like you look at somebody like Frank DeGods, like who I think everybody has different mixed feelings on, but like that guy communicates, right? And I think there's an interesting thing about the Web3 way that like, and this goes back to like Doodle's, being radio silent for all of like last summer on Twitter. Like, this is about a world where if you're going to be in this world, the deal you're making is, oh, we are building in public because people are going to be out there shouting at us for a variety of reasons, either good or bad, because they're following everything we do every step along the way. Right. And again, I think the crazy thing about this is, yes, NFTs are not equal to ownership of a company, but the NFT floor price directly is a public reflection of what the vibe of the world thinks of that your project in some ways, which is kind of crazy, right? When you think of that, the founders might be like, I don't believe that at all. But I tell you, in this space, it's true, right? Like in this space, Azuki, no matter, they came back from this crazy FUD and now they seem to be okay again. And nobody's out there talking about the Zagabond stuff anymore because they've steadied at about 14 or 15 floor price, which is pretty significant compared to like how far they went down. If Moonbirds were at a 14 or 15 floor price and it was in the top 3 projects versus where they are now, which is about 6.5, I think you'd be hearing way less about this, right? And I think that's one of the interesting things about this space, about like, how do you communicate? What does communication do? What does like your building aspects do with communication? And I'll also say like one thing for Kevin's thing, people love the Grails product, right? Grails is a really well-loved product. Like it's really smart. It's a cool way to open up the door to art stuff. So like, it's not like he has failed product after failed product in this line. Like he's done interesting stuff, but it's all this communication and number thing, which is tricky, I think.
So did you see this morning they posted that internal product?
It's funny in some ways because half of those are like raffles that they gave away in the Moonbirds Discord, which is fine. But I think what he's trying to do is show, hey, look at what we've done. You know what I mean? Which is at least a step in the right direction.
And I think the idea is to like continue to update that in some capacity kind of publicly, because I think there are people in the Moonbirds community, like they have done a bunch. I mean, they've driven a lot of value, especially if you bought that first proof pass, they've delivered a lot of value to you. And so I think, they put out this essentially like running ledger of the products they've shipped or the things they've done to say like, look, like to remind folks like, hey, we're a very legitimate group of people and we're a very legitimate project. A total side note, but I actually was just thinking about this as you were talking about the Azuki thing. I think Azuki is the only project I would say I have like consistently called right, which is when it first launched, I had a whole little soundbite being like, I don't feel comfortable with the fact that this founder is totally anonymous and this team is totally anonymous. And that feels like weirdly sketchy for this project that we're like letting just explode. And I have that on the record. And then of course, everything happened with Zagabond. And then when everything was happening with Zagabond, I was then looking back at him and, and I was like, oh, I actually think this dude is like very talented. And I think this team is really talented and we can all hate this, but like I'm now actually more bullish, ironically, now that I do kind of know the team. And both those predictions ended up being right. I'm usually wrong. Like, of course, like I feel like I've miscalled Yuga every time. Like I miscall all these things, but Azuki's the one. Of course I haven't profited off of it, but I do feel like my things have been right.
Well, and I will say the last thing about Azuki is like they are pretty good at communicating, right? That is one thing, no matter what. I mean, granted, we all know the story, the Zagabond story. And if you don't, you should look it up. Yes, there's definitely some stuff there that was worth looking into. But one thing that Azuki has done different than almost all these other projects outside, Yuga is Yuga, right? I think we're in a different stratosphere in some ways, but Azuki has a brand identity. They know how to talk about their project. Even Zagabond has a brand identity, which is a little like, it's a little too much for me. It's like mysterious guy. And he has these kind of like, almost like weird,
shadowy figure guy.
Yeah. Or like an advice he gives in his tweets, but they know their brand and they know what they're going to, they know what they're going to do. They have a sense of where they want to go. And I think that's all part of this world, right? It's a big thing. Yeah. So anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the last thing I would say on this, as we're already a little over time and we've got to do our overpriced, underpriced, is it'll also be interesting to see what happens with the token for them, because they've been talking about
teasing
a token. It's definitely been on their plan, on their roadmap. I would be very nervous right now as a project thinking about doing a token, but it gets us right back to that VC conversation, which is, I wonder to what extent that Andreessen, I think Andreessen was led their round. So. Yeah. And Andreessen definitely likes the token model. So I don't know if this is true or not, but I've heard that was one of the that Doodles actually decided not to go with Andreessen, as Doodles is one of the few projects that didn't have Andreessen on their cap table, and they were led by 776, which is Alex Ohanian's VC fund. And what I heard was partly because they felt like Andreessen was really pushing them towards doing what they were calling at the time the Yuga model, which meant launching a token. It seems like Andreessen very much likes this model of getting basically a token in something. And so I don't know, I have no idea, right? But like, I don't know if there's that kind of a weird tension or like a weird thing going on if you are proof, which is like concern about regulation stuff, regulatory stuff, but this kind of pressure to do a token because maybe that's on some level the sort of
the way you were
implicit or explicit, deal with the VCs.
Right.
And it maybe isn't even as much about just like a normal exit, but about the token liquidity. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens there. And I don't know how they're feeling about any of that, but it just gets us back to that. It's a new world with how money is made.
I honestly, though, I think that they were teasing a token. I would be pretty shocked at this point if it comes out, but you never know, right? I mean, like, I think the tricky thing is always going to be is what it looks like in the States. Like, Proof is a United States-based company, and in some ways it's different than other places, but I would be shocked. I mean, I think it would help the project in terms of like value prop, but I don't know. Again, it goes back to that thing: is do they know what they are? Do they know what the value?
Well, right.
Of that
it
thing
helps short term, maybe, because people like some initial liquidity and something to trade. But if you don't have something backstopping it, I mean, we didn't even. I guess we're going to get into this in the next section. Maybe this brings us to overpriced, underpriced, because this is my concern with these token launches. Like, I think Blur actually has a value prop, and I still said the Blur token was overpriced last week, just based on historical patterns when it comes to these kind of tokens. But I think I have a solid grasp of the Blur value prop, and that there actually is an interesting thing there with the Blur token as a governance token and essentially as a participant in marketplace fees down the line. The vast majority of these tokens, I don't know what you're backing it by. I mean, ApeCoin, the bet there is that they will be, the currency for the metaverse, essentially. And they are, definitely the furthest ahead in terms of being able to make that happen and having an ecosystem of players and things. And they've got so many things that they could potentially use Ape for. But anyways, we all, I think, sort of get this. It'll be interesting to see, but I worry about tokens. Okay. That segues us, I think, quite nicely into this week's Overpriced, Underpriced. We're going to try and race through these. And our very first Overpriced, Underpriced is the CollabLand token, which has been officially launched today, February 23rd.
Yep.
Is your first day you can start claiming. I don't know exactly the parameters around who can claim, but I think there's like 2 million or something wallets that they say are eligible. I assume I'm eligible. My God. I mean, I've connected with CollabLand how many times at this point if I'm not fucking eligible for this airdrop? So I'll check back with that. It's tonight. So we're recording this Thursday, February 23rd tonight at like 6 p.m. Mountain Time or something. It's going live. It feels like it's probably token season a little bit on the back of this Blur stuff. We've seen this after ENS happened. I feel like that's when we had with like SOS, we had Looks token. Like it feels like a bunch of tokens will come out after any of these big drops. What do you think? Do you think CollabLand token season broadly, CollabLand overpriced, underpriced?
Okay, CollabLand overpriced. CollabLand overpriced. I think this is a really tricky one to have a token for. I almost think like Vulcan has taken the vast majority of its share. It feels like, and CollabLand, I don't even use that often anymore on Discord. But that's not me. I just don't know enough about where their business is. But I feel like that's overpriced. Token season may be underpriced, right? I only say that because like token season is an interesting thing, and we haven't had a really good one for a while. And Blur was obviously a big one for the NFT market. If there are rollouts of these, if the ARB token happens, which people have been rumored for a while, like there is a world where this does open up. And when I say underpriced, I mean like it's just a matter of like the amount of liquidity that can be brought into the system from a token season, right? Like it does extend out a slight, like I would never say like we're in a pure bull market because obviously we're not right now, but like it gives you building blocks to kind of start saying a world where like, oh, there's maybe more of a bull coming back. Like we have moments of bull markets in the NFT right now, but like in general, we're still in a pretty deep bear. But like token season feels like it's like, oh, there's little chunks of liquidity that are coming through and maybe there's a world where you can kind of dig out. So I think token season might be underpriced.
I actually like that. I like that call. I will go with you on that, but I think tokens themselves actually will probably largely be overpriced, certainly including a CollabLand token, though I will absolutely try and claim it and sell it if I can remember. I say absolutely, and then I'm like, I will 100% forget and not do it because I am
you get your
absolutely
$25. You'll get your $25.
I know, exactly, literally. It's like not even worth it. Okay. This Dapper Labs lawsuit, a lot of misunderstandings around it. I feel like the misunderstandings have mostly been cleared up where most people understand this. There was not actually a ruling dubbing Top Shot Moments securities, though that was the headline that was going around for a while. I guess, do you find this news overpriced, underpriced?
Okay, well, there's this. I think it's probably underpriced in that this is going to be a story we're going to be talking about. I think that, the conversation here is really going to be about how well does our legal system understand decentralized assets and how well can it be communicated to an 81-year-old judge? You know what I mean? Like these are all
moments aren't decentralized assets.
Yeah,
I think
guess
moments.
That's true. Yeah.
The thing here to me is moments are baseball cards, right? So to break this down really fast, I think it's all about the Howey test, right? And basically what's happened in this lawsuit is the judge has basically, there's a group of plaintiffs suing Dapper. Dapper pushed for a motion to dismiss the case altogether, to basically have a judge throw it out and say there's no merits here. And a judge has ruled, no, I'm not going to throw it out. We will actually have a trial about this where not like a jury trial, but a judge will rule on this, right? So that was the latest news. So there's been no actual ruling, but the case is moving forward. And I think these are, in my opinion, just clearly baseball cards where there seems to be nuance here. And what these plaintiffs are trying to claim is sort of two things, my understanding. One is the profits on moments go to support flow, and flow staying alive is directly correlated to these moments having value. Like, if you buy baseball cards and that baseball card company goes out of business, like you still have your baseball cards. The question is the price of these moments too highly correlated with the success of the company that underpins them? And to me, that's actually just partly about like the infancy of this space. Like with a little bit more maturation and maturity, like people wouldn't correlate moments with how Flow is doing as a blockchain, because it's not actually equity in Flow, the blockchain. But I can understand if you're like, that seems to be a loop that can make it look a little bit more like a security, because it almost feels like buying moments means like you're buying into sort of Dapper and Flow. So that's sort of one of the complicated things. But not all NFTs like this, depending, like, the ruling here, if the judge rules these are securities, that's obviously horrendous for us. But there are some nuances like that one that aren't necessarily reflected in all other NFTs. That mean it doesn't necessarily just mean, okay, we're all fucked and this is all securities. The other thing is, and this I feel like does resonate with more NFT projects, is the tweets and the columns coming out of Dapper in the early days that were like very clearly celebrating price action and being like to the moon and graphs going up and that kind of thing, which the celebration of price movement, specifically upward price movement, can certainly then leads consumers to believe that this is a bit more of an investment than maybe, just a pure collectible.
I think this is one of those things where we're gonna this is why it's underpriced, and it's kind of like what you and Zeneca were saying last week. Is like anytime with the Kraken thing, anytime these sorts of things like get in front of legal representatives and precedent can be created, like it's pretty scary, right? Like but I hope that we've matured enough to kind of understand the nuances like you're talking about here. Rather than being stuck in a world where we're just in black and white world for a long time. So who knows? Yeah.
And I guess, I say these Dapper moments aren't decentralized because the Dapper is like a pretty centralized, like Flow is decentralized. And we had the Dapper team on. We should plug this episode. I had the Dapper team on, the CTO and their head of like sports business pretty recently on the podcast, which was a good conversation. And one of the things they were really pushing is like Flow is a decentralized blockchain. Like people think of it as not, but they do have nodes being run by all sorts of different folks. And I think they want it to be even further decentralized than it maybe even presently is. But Moments themselves and Dapper themselves have a lot of, is a pretty centralized entity. And Dapper Moments very much live only on, the kind of, the Top Shot Moments live on in the Dapper ecosystem. And it's a pretty closed system. So, okay, you're going underpriced.
Underpriced on the idea that it's a big deal. This is how we define this, right?
Yeah. I'll go with you. I think the initial reaction was clearly overpriced. Like people overestimated this, like because the initial thing was like, oh my god, these these things are being ruled as a security, and that's not necessarily true. But yeah, I said this last week, like, I just think logic has to prevail, and that's
so.
totally not true. And the other thing that's of course being said about this is the judge on this case is 81 years old and probably doesn't understand.
Maybe we'll get
Facebook's
lucky. Maybe
model.
he's like the coolest grandpa of all time. Maybe he's got like a kid, a daughter, or a son, and then they've got grandkids, and they're like, maybe he's an ape holder. Who knows? Maybe he's like an on-chain maxi, and he's like a toad guy. That would be the best. You see some 80-year-old guy. So who knows? You never know.
Yeah. No, yeah. I love the optimism there, Gavin. I love it. Okay, last couple of ones. Sorry, we're running over here, folks. Friendsies AI. This is a story people probably know. Basically, they raised $5.3 million through a Dutch auction. I don't know how many months ago. I remember it was like February. Wasn't it like a year ago? It was like February of last year.
It was a long time ago. Yeah.
I really do think it was like I think it was like almost a year. I think it was February last year, but I don't know for sure. So you can come for me. And like basically came out with a tweet being like, we're stopping the project because like we don't. Apparently they're not. Apparently they've now since come back and said no, we're still working. We're just not making public announcements. We're just not do it. I don't know.
Well, here's the thing. This goes back to our comms thing. The worst thing they could have ever done is they tweeted and then they deleted the Twitter account. The Twitter account was gone. Then they came back on and they said, we're not leaving. I think so. My take on this is hard, right? Because every project that has a life cycle, and like going back to the Kevin conversation, 9 out of 10 projects are going to fail, right? I think the issue with this project in particular was there was a lot of things that they promised they were going to do, they didn't do, and they sold at a very high number, right? They sold at I think they raised, I think it was $5 million when they sold their mints. And I think the expectation was that like you would at least get something or hear something back out of this team. And then suddenly to have it be like ripped apart, like that's the thing that felt weird. So the idea of Friendsies and this sort of thing happening more often, I'm trying to figure out a way to put the underpriced, overpriced on it. I think.
Hey, you made this list, man.
I made this list. So, but I will say, I think more of these are going to happen. So I will say this is underpriced in the way that, like, I think there's going to be a bunch of these happening. I don't think many of them are going to happen in this form. I think there's a much smarter way to do this. It's to talk directly to your people and be very open about stuff and be clear. You also can't do it after not talking for a while to them.
Well, this is the funniest thing. So they come online after having basically been offline for like 6 months to tell you that they're not going to be online anymore. And you're like,
exactly. What the fuck?
Thanks, bro. Got it. Like, it's
exactly.
So funny that I remember this drop was just such a hyped thing. And so many big folks I feel like got in on this. I mean, the premise of, hey, you're gonna have this NFT and it's gonna become your friend because we're gonna infuse it with AI and it's gonna learn you and your. It's a
good idea. Needs. That's what we're hearing about in the world.
I mean, it's an amazing. It's funny. It's like it's an amazing idea. It's so in vogue right now. It is a huge idea though, and this is where I'm like, were they planning on funding all of this just based on this drop? Like this, and this is kind of my takeaway for all of this stuff. Whether it's even with some proof or this, it's just like. And it's on us. Like, we're the fuel for this. Like, we are feeding these monsters by giving them our money to then go do the thing. Like, the comms, like, business comms, like, I was saying this to you before, I think. Like, if you're a pop star, right? Like, there are people in the world who have, like, run pop star comms for now, like, many decades and kind of know the beats and know the stops. And there's enough money there that, like, you can pre-plan a bunch of stuff. Like, this space is so, like, get the money and then figure it out. Mm-hmm. And what happens when you get the money and then figure it out is all of the stuff that we're seeing.
Yes.
Which is 100%. That like, oh, shit always ends up being more complicated than you're expecting it to be. It's always more expensive. It always takes longer. Like everything is harder, longer, and more expensive than you think it's going to be. And that's very hard when you've collected the money up front and are now like figuring that out in real time in public post receiving the money. So this isn't to justify the frenzy stuff. Like my thing is like, did you think you only, that sounds like a very big undertaking. Like where they're pretty prominent artists. I mean, they've had big shows. Like where did you think the money, also like they apparently had bad treasury management. And so they didn't actually convert to ETH. So when they minted out, ETH was at like 3,000. So they probably have half the money they had. They had a tax burden, I'm sure. It's like, they probably have like $2 million or $1 million at this point relative to what, but like, you were going to build like an AI friend on that? Like that seems like not enough money for that.
Yeah. I mean,
I'm sure I'm missing something. I'm sure they had other money, but
this goes back to I think exactly what you're talking about is the building in public question, right? And the other question is like, should people be building in public? One thing that happens when you do a VC fund of a company is that you have to go and present yourself to all these VCs, and these VCs are savvy people that know to feel people out and kind of get a sense, not just of what the business is going to be, but like what this person is going to be. And one thing in the NFT world that we do very easily is buy into ideas, right? We buy into an idea of something, or we buy into art. And you may not have the savvy sense of being able to sit and meet that person in the same way or have a good sense of it. And like, it's just a different, and we're now, you know, we say retail and us, everybody that's in the space are the VCs at a much smaller level. So yeah, I just think more of this is
VCs without the equity.
Yeah, exactly.
And without the ability to call the founder at any point and get answers on things. And like without all of the things that can like maybe give a VC an advantage when investing. No, it's so dope. I love that we're doing this. Yeah, I'm going to go overpriced. I don't know what I'm saying overpriced to, but like all of this whole conversation has made me feel like all of this is overpriced.
It's overpriced, exactly.
It's a ridiculous way to go about any sort of business. Okay, let's race through these next two. The SewerPass Golden Key. This is a pretty straightforward overpriced, underpriced. Mongrel listed his SewerPass Golden Key at 2,222 ETH.
Yeah.
Overpriced, underpriced.
It's overpriced, but still,
yeah, right?
It's worth a lot, but I mean, he's just trying to get a number out there. It's overpriced.
Sure. Some DAO is trying to raise 690 ETH to put a bid on it for that or something, apparently.
That seems, I mean, listen, it's a giant asset of Yuga's. It's
the only
story.
one of one.
The only
of,
one
like,
of one.
Yuga's.
So yeah, it feels like it's worth it probably for that. I mean,
1,000 ETH though?
No. For the maybe 600 ETH, I was going to say. Like, I don't.
But
why 690,
you're getting close to 1,000.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
yeah.
It's all fake numbers. Like you're doing this. It's just. I mean, who the hell?
Performative.
It's performative. Totally. Yes. And like maybe someday in the market it would be worth more. Like it's such a big number at that point. It's like who knows. Okay, Bing ChatGPT as the beginning of AI Armageddon.
I'm gonna say underpriced.
As if people are not afraid enough about this? Okay, I'll go overpriced.
Okay.
Great, let's fight.
Okay.
Go quickly.
So I follow this space closely. I only say underpriced because I think that people are like, oh, that's so stupid. It's like, it's so funny. They dig into this. When you start to like extrapolate this out. Now, when I say AI Armageddon, it may not be AI Armageddon, but like, I think this is a pretty big deal in terms of how we will see AI in the future and how AI will be part of what we do. And Armageddon is a weird world because that we've always talked about the idea of like AI destroying the world. I don't think that's going to happen, but there's a very real possibility seeing these little nuggets of this stuff that like AI will take over culture in some way. Do you know what I mean? And when I mean that, like there is a very real possibility that AI in the near to mid future, let's not say maybe not even near, like let's say mid to late future, has figured out how to economically get the world in a better place. And humans basically are like, free to roam the earth and do things they like. And that's the thing that is like, this is the nuggets of, it feels like. So that's why I say underpriced. It's a much broader, longer term thing, but I think we're going to be seeing over the next 2 years a lot more of this shit that's going to feel like, oh, wow, this is not just, somebody programmed in some words. This is something that's truly a game changer in terms of how we look at the world. Okay.
I went overpriced on this. My brain went to a different direction of this, which is, so I listened to, and I've, read the Kevin Roose story with like his New York Times tech reporter who had a very strange, totally agree. It was a very strange interaction with Bing, whose internal code, or with the Bing Chat GPT plugin, basically, the internal code name for it at Microsoft was Sydney. And
which, by the way, sounds like a sci-fi villain in the first place, right? Like,
yes, Sydney, it's already kind of a weird code name.
Yeah.
And then, so at some point during this conversation that Kevin was having, it was like in beta, right? It's not public yet. And Kevin is a tech reporter for the New York Times, so he's getting early access to it and he's talking to it and it sort of snaps into Sydney mode and it just becomes this like lovesick, very weird, dark character. And it is weird. Like if you listen to him describe the experience and read the conversation, or I didn't read the New York Times piece, I actually just listened to him talk about it on Hard Fork, the podcast. I was like, that is weird. And it's like, it's so hard to wrap your head around it being a computer because it's saying such human things that feel so human. It's, and they talk about this in the episode, right? Like Google, you had that Google engineer, what was it, a year ago, who quit because he was like, this shit is sentient. And you totally understand how you get there because you listen to the stuff and you're like, it feels like a ghost in the machine, right? And I think there are very obviously dark places that this is going to go. Like if you think like QAnon was weird and bad and kind of dark for humanity. like the idea that this is going to take that to a whole new level is like kind of a no-brainer, and that there's going to be deep fakes and we're going to have some period of transition time when like we really do not know what videos are real and what is not, and like what is Harry Styles actually saying, or is that a deep fake, or like right, like all of that stuff I think will happen and be very dark. But I'm sort of already pricing that in, and I think that humans end up withstanding these crazy technological changes somehow. And that QAnon itself, like if you were could have predicted that 10 years ago and been like, that'll be the end of civilization. So it's sort of like, how do you rank what we're already experiencing? Because I think it's going to be more of that, where there's going to be a lot that's really fucked up about it. But I also don't think we're all going to perish. I think humans will find a way to continue to survive through what will definitely be like very mind-fucky times. Okay, we're way over time, but so I went overpriced because I think people are like totally expecting us all to perish. On the other hand, I think there's plenty of people who do not realize how dark it's going to get with everything I just described. So I don't know. Take that as you will. All right, Gavin, this was so fun.
Super fun.
I'm sure we'll do this many times.
Yeah, exactly. Great. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of Overpriced JPEGs. If you liked this conversation, if you liked this episode, please go ahead and hit subscribe. It helps me out, it helps the show out, and it means you will get alerts and updates when we post new content. Thanks again.